We're going to start off with Chelsea because they're back to winning ways, took another step to defend their Champions League title, 2-0 win over Lille at the Bridge last night. And the big story that came out of this was that Romelu Lukaku was on the bench. We had a lot of conversation about this yesterday, Jody, about the 7 touches against Palace, the criticism that he's come under as well. Now, speaking after the game, Chelsea boss Thomas Tuchel defended his decision to leave the star striker on the bench. Have a listen.
Was not the moment after the match where everybody was focused on the few touches that he had to put him right away into the next fire. It was the moment to take a step back. That was the decision, and that's it. But you can clearly see. I mean, we have now a strong win. We had a strong performance. It was a tough match, and almost every question is about Romelu. So the focus is huge. There are like 9 other players who did not play, and we should never forget that we consider this sport a team sport.
Okay, so there were his decisions for having him on the bench and not playing him at all actually yesterday. Were you surprised he was on the bench?
Not really. I think that there's been obviously a lot of speculation about his form and more recently the amount of touches, but I feel like if you're at a top club like Chelsea, and especially if you're an attacker and you're not maybe performing to the strengths of the team or what the manager's asking for, then sometimes you find yourself out of the team. I'm not saying those are the reasons, but at the same time, I think you're hearing a manager come out there and protecting one of his biggest assets, because if Chelsea are going to be successful, I mean, you want Lukaku firing on all cylinders, and I'm sure the manager wants him to be performing at a better level, but I'm sure he wants to be performing at a better level for himself as well. I mean, I think they're both world class, and I suppose there's just a bit of a case that they can maybe both sort it out. Well, sort it out. I say sort it out. It's just you've got a manager that's trying to protect his player there.
Jody, it's funny because that's what we're talking about this morning, and it's kind of strange because he's given himself not a problem. He's given him a dilemma that he actually would hope he would get, because he brings Lukaku out the firing line for whatever reason, and the reasons have been pretty well documented. And I thought Chelsea looked good last night. I thought Havertz played that role really, really well. So in many ways you could say, he's given himself a little bit of a dilemma, a little bit of a problem. However, he now knows that he's fairly comfortable that Havertz can play that position. So I think it's a kind of decision that managers and coaches have to make, right? Because obviously, and he mentioned it in his interview there, the most important thing is how the team perform.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think you're right. I think all the top managers have no problem dropping players anyway, especially if they're maybe not in their best form. I think maybe a tougher decision will come Sunday about who he then plays. Yeah. But again, that might be where you have to again tap the manager on his back and give him a pat on the back and say, well, he made a change last night, it worked. Havertz had one of his better games in the shirt, especially in the Champions League, where he's performed well before, but come Sunday we'll see
What would you do?
I don't know. I mean, I don't. These questions are one of the ones that I used to think about when I hear people talk about, oh, you should do this. You don't see what happens during the week in training. You don't see how they are around the training ground. You don't know what the discussions are in the background.
What do you think, Jody, looking at Lukaku, right? Because it's an interesting one. Do you think we'd be having this conversation, right? Obviously, everybody's touched on and looked at it and said, look, he's only had 7 touches. Effectively, if he's not scoring, there's not a great deal of output or contribution from him. Do you think we'd have been having this conversation if he had 10 touches against Palace, but 2 of them were goals?
Probably not. I mean, I have to admit, in Lukaku's defence at the beginning of the season, I don't think he was getting much service anyway, and he was still scoring. He was getting like one chance and scoring a goal. Granted, I think he's obviously brought on a little bit more pressure and speculation and the spotlight with the interview that he done. But unfortunately, that comes with the territory. And if you ain't performing, and you can't ignore 6 touches for someone of his class and the class of Chelsea and the way that they play. I mean, there is an element that the team should be playing a little bit more to his strengths, but I think all top players don't wait for the game to come to them. They do have to rely on their teammates, yes, but then to that extent of 6 touches, you do have to go and get the game a little bit more.
I want to ask you about Thiago Silva as a professional and a player that is still playing for a top team in the Premier League. I don't know how, at the age of 37, how's he doing it, Jody?
Unbelievable. I mean, for starters, the reason he is doing it is, one, because he's world class, but two, he's a top professional who does everything he can to make sure that he's in the right condition to play a game, to train. I mean, that was one of the concerns we had when we signed him, was, can he play week in, week out? Will we have to leave him out? You don't really want to be taking out centre-halves and replacing them and like kind of rotating. But from the minute he walked through the door, I mean, although the language barrier was a bit difficult, kind of always needed a translator when he wanted to speak. But we come back from like games before, and he would be on the phone to Frank, like wanting to talk about games that he weren't involved in or he was injured for. He wanted to speak about things that had gone in the game. He's a student of the game, and I think a future manager as well.
I was looking at him, Jody, and obviously you speak about it there, and you can tell, without knowing the lad, you can tell he's just, his habits, everything about him is absolutely first class. And the reason he's playing at that level is because A, he's looked after himself, and B, there's an inbuilt desire that he wants to keep going. And I always felt there was, the longer in my own career, I always felt you actually trained as hard, you looked after yourself because you were scared of it coming to an end. And I think there's probably an element of that with Silva, who's been absolutely first class. But the point I was wanting to ask you, he's one of these players, I mentioned later on, he's one of these players, clearly a brilliant player, but if you're a teammate, you're absolutely delighted. You're really comfortable with him being in the side, and you're delighted because he makes your team better.
Yeah, and not only from his own performances, but the way he wants to organise, the way he gives people a kick up the backside when they deserve it, when they're making mistakes that they shouldn't be making, and little speeches he gives before the game or at half time and stuff. He's a real winner, and I thought he was a top player before he came to Chelsea, and always admired him from afar. But when you see him close up and the level of which he's performing at under Tuchel as well, I think he's an amazing player.
talkSPORT Breakfast with Laura Woods, Monday to Wednesday mornings 6 till 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.